They tried to burn every page that mentioned him, but a body like his could never be erased. In the winter of 1875, a boy's body was carried through the back gates of the hospital of Santa Maria Nuova in Florence under a tar-stained shroud, his arrival logged not in the public registry, but in a book kept behind a locked iron door. The entry was brief: male, 10 years, no kin, cause unknown. But those words, small, almost careless, would soon weigh more than anything else written that year. He had been found in the courtyard of an abandoned monastery on the city's northern edge, his bare feet blackened from cold stone, his pulse faint, his breath uneven. The friar who discovered him swore the boy had whispered something in Latin before collapsing. No one else heard the words, but the friar repeated them again and again to the physicians: duplicem viam, 2 paths. When the surgeons cut away the boy's threadbare shirt, they found no wounds, no bruises, no sign of illness. Yet his eyes, pale grey, unblinking, followed their movements with the quiet calculation of someone far older. They prepared him for examination. His skin was warm, but there was something about the way his chest rose and fell almost too precisely that unsettled even the most seasoned among them. The first incision was meant to be routine, a shallow cut along the rib cage to explore the lungs. Instead, the lead surgeon's scalpel halted after less than an inch, his knuckles whitening as he pressed back the tissue. Beneath the expected ivory lattice of nerves, there was another, perfectly mirrored. Every branch doubled, every line repeated, symmetrical and deliberate, running like pale silk beside its twin. The assistants leaned in, then recoiled as if the boy might sit up at any moment. No one spoke. They all knew what they were looking at, and that it should have been impossible. One of them whispered, "Ed, to seal the wound and call the priest." Another suggested immediate transfer to the university's anatomical theater, but the senior physician's voice cut through the room like a blade. "No record, no witness. This does not leave here." The door was barred from the inside, the lamps dimmed, and somewhere between the flicker of the flame and the shifting of shadows, the boy's eyes closed, but his lips moved again, soundless, shaping words no one would ever admit to hearing. They worked in whispers as if sound alone might wake him. The senior physician ordered the second table cleared of instruments. Only a small brass tray remained, its surface cold enough to bead moisture in the lamplight. He motioned for the boy to be transferred onto it, not for surgery, but for storage. In the flicker of that room, his skin took on the waxy sheen of a figure already dead, though his pulse still pushed stubbornly at the hollow of his throat. One assistant refused to come closer. "It's wrong," she muttered. "The body is speaking." At first they thought she meant moving, but when the youngest intern leaned in, he swore he could hear 2 distinct rhythms beneath the boy's ribs, 2 heartbeats, each slightly out of step with the other, as though the body housed a second conductor waiting for its turn. The lead surgeon did not write this down. He did not write anything down. Instead, he reached for a bottle of carbolic acid and poured it into a shallow porcelain bowl, letting the acrid steam rise between them. The boy's breathing hitched, but he did not stir. From a locked cabinet, the physician retrieved a roll of thin, translucent parchment, the kind used for anatomical sketches. He began tracing what he had seen: the doubled network of nerves, the perfect bilateral mirror. His lines were swift, precise, almost fevered, as though capturing the image was the only thing keeping it from vanishing. When the drawing was done, he held it at arm's length, studying it as if trying to decide whether it proved something or condemned him. Without warning, he struck a match and set the edges alight. The parchment curled in on itself, blackening into silence. No one spoke again until the fire was out. And then the order came, calm but final. The boy is to be moved before sunrise, no hospital, no registry, and if anyone asks, he never existed. Somewhere beyond. And the shuttered window, bells began tolling midnight. Inside, the boy's fingers twitched once, twice, gripping the edge of the tray as though he had been listening the entire time. By the time the bells finished their 12th toll, the boy was gone from the hospital. They wrapped him in coarse linen, bound with twine, and placed him in the back of a covered carriage with no crest, no markings, just a driver in a dark wool coat who did not look at his cargo. The streets of Florence were slick with frost, the narrow alleys breathing out curls of mist as the wheels cut silently through them. Their destination was not another ward or infirmary, but a building no one in the city spoke of above a whisper, the San Rocco Asilo, a crumbling structure on the southern bank of the Arno, long abandoned as an orphanage and quietly repurposed for cases that could not bear public scrutiny. The windows were shuttered from the inside, the courtyard overgrown, and the wrought iron gate bore a padlock so rusted it seemed ornamental. The driver did not enter. He left the bundle at the threshold, knocked twice, and was gone before the latch clicked open. A figure emerged, tall, wrapped in a black cloak, face obscured by the wide brim of a hat. He lifted the boy effortlessly, as though weight meant nothing to him, and disappeared back inside. The next morning, a visitor arrived at the hospital asking for records of a child admitted the previous night. Her name was Signora Conti, a widow of some means whose brother served on the faculty of the University of Pisa. Her manner was not frantic but precise, as if she already knew the answer and only wanted to see who would lie to her face. The clerk offered the expected denial. No such patient, no such case. She listened, nodded once, and then placed a sealed envelope on the desk. "For the chief surgeon," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "Tell him I know what was found, and I know where you sent him." When she left, the clerk broke the seal despite himself. Inside was a single scrap of paper bearing only 2 words in neat black ink: Duplicem viam. San Rocco Asilo did not smell like a hospital. It smelled of dust and candle wax, of ink ground into old wood, of rain seeping slowly into stone. The boy was placed in a narrow bed beneath a vaulting ceiling where the plaster had cracked into a web of fine lines. No other children occupied the ward, only empty cots, each stripped bare, as if the room were waiting for ghosts to return. The man in the black cloak removed his hat. His hair was silver at the temples, his face lined but expressionless, his eyes the pale green of oxidized copper. He did not introduce himself. He simply drew a stool beside the bed and began watching. At first, the boy lay still, breathing shallowly, but as the hours passed, something in his posture shifted, his head turning toward the stranger, his fingers twitching in patterns too deliberate to be random. Twice his lips moved soundlessly. The man wrote each motion down in a notebook with narrow, slanted handwriting. In the corner, a brass contraption sat on a table, wires, coils, and 2 shallow copper plates. It hummed faintly when the man touched it, the air around it prickling like the moment before lightning strikes. By evening, he wheeled it to the boy's bedside. Without ceremony, he pressed one plate against the boy's temple, the other against the base of his spine. The boy's back arched at the first touch, his jaw tightening, his eyes flying open, not with pain, but with something colder, like recognition. The man adjusted a dial. The copper plates began to thrum in unison. Beneath the boy's skin, the mirrored nerves seemed to shiver, light catching in invisible threads that the eye should not have been able to see. The man leaned in close, speaking for the first time all day. His voice was low, almost reverent. 2 systems, and only one will obey. The boy's breathing slowed, his pupils narrowed to pinpoints, and then, impossi, bly. The second heartbeat quickened, overtaking the first. From the far end of the ward, behind the half-closed door, a woman's silhouette lingered. She had been there since dusk. Silent, listening. The woman did not step fully into the light. Her outline was sharp against the doorframe, straight-backed, gloved hands folded before her, the brim of her hat casting her face into shadow. Yet the man in the black cloak spoke without turning. "You should not be here." Her reply was even, almost polite. Neither should he. She moved closer, boots silent on the stone floor. In her hand she carried a leather folio, the clasp worn smooth by years of use. She placed it on the table beside the brass contraption and unfastened it. Inside were pages, some sketches, some photographs, each bearing the same signature at the bottom in crisp, measured script: L. Conti. The man's gaze flicked to her face for the first time. "You drew these?" "I lived them," she said. The sketches were of children, not ordinary children, but bodies opened in precise dissections, revealing strange redundancies, doubled vessels, extra nodes, mirrored lattices of nerve and bone. Some drawings were dated years before the boy in the bed was even born. "I thought I had found them all," she continued, her voice lower now. "I thought the last had died in 63. Then I heard a friar muttering Latin in a marketplace about a boy who whispered duplicem viam." Her eyes, grey like the boy's, shifted toward the bed. For the first time his gaze followed hers, and in that small motion, something unspoken passed between them. The man in the cloak straightened, his expression tightening. "If you're here for pity, you'll find none. He is not the first, and he will not be the last. The work continues." Conti closed the folio, her fingers resting on the clasp. "The work," she said softly, "is the reason they keep dying." From the bed came a sudden, sharp intake of breath. The boy's hands clenched the sheets, both heartbeats hammering in uneven sync, and in the next instant the lamps guttered, though no wind had touched the room. The lamps did not flicker back to life. For a heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, the ward was plunged into a darkness so complete that even the crack in the plaster above the bed disappeared. The only sound was the boy's breathing. And then something else, faint and sharp, like the crackle of paper catching fire. A pale glow began to spread beneath his skin. It was not warm light, not the golden hue of a candle, but cold and thin, tracing the mirrored nerves in delicate filigree. Each strand lit in sequence, a map unfolding from the base of his skull to the soles of his feet. The effect was both surgical and unnatural, as though the body had decided to illuminate itself from the inside. The man in the cloak reached for the copper plates. "Don't touch him," Conti warned, but too late. His hand brushed the boy's forearm. A jolt knocked him back as though struck by an unseen fist, his stool skidding across the floor. The boy sat up, not fast, not violently, simply upright, his movements deliberate, eyes open but fixed on something beyond the room. His breathing no longer matched the rise and fall of his chest. It was as if the 2 rhythms inside him had split entirely, one mechanical, one sentient. A glass beaker on the far table began to tremble. Then another. The brass contraption's coils hummed until their pitch slid beyond hearing, the air in the ward turning heavy, metallic. The glow along his nerves pulsed once, twice, and with the third pulse, the lamps reignited in a violent flare. The boy's gaze snapped to Conti. For a moment there was recognition, then a word, spoken aloud for the first time since his arrival. "Leave." The command was not shouted. It was not even loud, but it carried a weight that made both adults step back without meaning to. Then, just as suddenly, the light in his body guttered out. He fell backward onto the bed, limp, his breathing slow but set. "Eddie." The room smelled faintly of ozone. Conti turned to the man in the cloak. "You're losing control already," she said. He didn't answer, but in his eyes there was no denial. By dawn, the ward looked untouched. The beakers were back in place, the copper plates cleaned and stacked, the boy motionless beneath his coarse linen blanket. Only the faint scorch mark on the floor where the stool had struck remained as proof that the night had been anything but ordinary. But proof was not required for rumor to grow. A novice from the adjoining convent had been in the corridor when the lamps failed. She claimed she heard a voice, not a child's voice, but something older, speaking in a language she did not know. By the time she reached the chapel to tell the others, the word had already shifted, miracolo. By midday, it had become maleficio. At a tobacco shop near the Ponte alla Carraia, 2 men played cards in the back room. One was an orderly from the hospital. The other, a quiet man in a dark overcoat, listened without comment as the orderly described the boy who shone like a lantern before being taken away in the night. When the story was finished, the quiet man slid a single coin across the table. "Where did they take him?" The orderly hesitated. The coin was gold. "San Rocco Asilo," he said at last, voice low. The quiet man stood, adjusted his gloves and left without another word. By nightfall, his report was on the desk of a certain Signor Bardi, a financier whose name never appeared in newspapers, but whose influence could choke the funding of any hospital, convent, or university in Tuscany. Bardi was not interested in miracles or curses. He was interested in the device rumored to have made the boy's nerves ignite, and in what might happen if such a system could be extracted, replicated, and sold. He wrote a single note on heavy paper, sealed in black wax, and sent it with a courier who knew better than to read it. Acquire the subject intact. Eliminate all witnesses. Somewhere in the dark streets between the Arno and San Rocco, 3 men began walking toward the asilo. The first warning came not from the watchman at the gate. There was no watchman, but from the dogs in the neighboring courtyard. They began barking in sharp, frantic bursts, the kind that meant something more than a passing carriage. Conti froze mid-step, her gloved hand tightening on the folio. The cloaked man was already moving to the window. 3 figures crossed the courtyard below, their coats dark and heavy, their pace steady. They did not look up, did not pause to knock. One carried a canvas-wrapped bundle the size of a crowbar. Another had his hands in his pockets, but the fabric bulged at his hip in a way that suggested steel. "They're not from the city," the cloaked man muttered. His tone was not fearful, but calculating. "And they know exactly where they're going." Conti's gaze flicked toward the boy's bed. He had not moved since the previous night, though his breathing had a strange rhythm. 3 shallow breaths, 1 long, then stillness. It reminded her of something she had heard long ago. The breathing pattern of a hawk, moments before it strikes. From outside came the scrape of metal on metal. The padlock at the gate had not been forced in years, yet now it surrendered with a single sharp crack. "Options," Conti said, keeping her voice even. "Hide him," the man replied. "You won't be able to move him without—" The boy's eyes opened, not slowly, not with the hazy drift of waking, but all at once, pupils pinning them both where they stood. "They are here for me," he said. The voice was his, yet not his, an echo beneath each word, as though the second system had decided to speak with him this time. The cloaked man took a step toward the bed. "Then you will not leave this room." The boy's gaze shifted to the door. "Neither will they." Outside, the latch turned. The door swung inward with a groan of swollen wood. The first man stepped across the threshold, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. The smell of rain followed him, along with the dull glint of iron beneath his coat. He did not get a second step. The air in the ward changed. Not colder, not warmer, but thicker, as if the space between walls had been packed with invisible threads. His boots slowed, not from hesitation, but as though each movement cost more effort than the last. The boy sat upright, sheets pooling at his waist. No glow this time, just stillness. The kind of stillness that feels like the moment before an animal strikes. His eyes tracked the intruder without blinking. The second man entered, lifting the bundle from his shoulder. The canvas fell away, revealing a length of polished steel capped with copper prongs. It was not a weapon for killing. It was a weapon for taking alive. The prongs never touched the boy. They stopped mid-air, trembling, the copper tips hissing faintly as though they'd been plunged into ice water. The third man, still at the doorway, drew a pistol. He aimed at the cloaked man first, and then the ward itself responded. The window slammed shut with such force that the glass did not shatter. It liquefied, slumping into warped, opaque sheets before hardening again. The iron bed frames along the wall groaned, their legs twisting into the stone floor. From the ceiling, dust and grit fell like pale snow. The pistol clattered to the ground. The man's fingers had locked rigid, unable to obey. Only the boy's breathing moved the air now, each exhale drawing the intruders 1 step closer to stillness. 1 heartbeat, 2, until none of them could move at all. The boy's gaze shifted to Conti. "They can still hear," he said. She understood the implication. The cloaked man did not hesitate. He crossed the room, took one of the motion, less men by the jaw, and whispered something too soft to catch. When he let go, the man's eyes no longer focused. The boy lay back down. "They will forget why they came," he murmured. Conti did not answer. because she knew they wouldn't forget. Not entirely. They brought the men to him just before midnight. Bardi sat in his study, the fire low, a ledger open beside a half-finished glass of Amaro. He did not look up immediately when the door opened. When he did, his expression did not change. The three stood in a row, hats in hand, clothes damp from the night air. They were unmarked, no wounds, no visible injuries, but something in their posture was wrong. They swayed faintly, as though balanced on the deck of a ship. Bardi closed the ledger. "Well?" Silence. He rose, walked to the first man, and lifted his chin. The eyes that met his were not those of the man he'd sent out. They were glassy, unfocused, as if some other gaze were looking through them. "What did you see?" he asked. The man's lips parted, but no sound came. Instead, his jaw clicked softly like a clock striking an hour that did not exist. Bardi moved to the second. "The boy?" This one answered. Just one word. "Two." Then he smiled. Slow, strange. And the smile did not fade even when Bardi struck him across the mouth. The third man spoke without being asked. "It will not let us in again." Bardi stepped back. He had seen men broken before, by debt, by disease, by fear, but never reshaped like this. This was not forgetting. This was replacement. He poured himself another measure of Amaro, drank it, and set the glass down with care. "Burn San Rocco," he said. His secretary hesitated. "Sir." "Burn it," Bardi repeated, "with everyone inside. If it lives, bring me the ashes." Outside the villa, rain began to fall in heavy, deliberate drops. The first smell was not smoke, but oil. Conti caught it as she crossed the corridor, a faint metallic tang that clung to the throat. By the time she reached the ward, the cloaked man was already at the window, watching shadows move beyond the courtyard wall. "They're pouring it along the perimeter," he said. "They mean to burn us in place." Conti's eyes went to the boy. He sat at the edge of the bed, feet bare against the stone floor, head tilted slightly, as if listening to something far beyond the walls. "You can stop them," she said. The boy looked at her, not with confusion, but with a strange, almost pitying stillness. "Not without leaving." The cloaked man turned sharply. "Leave. He cannot." A sudden roar cut him off. The courtyard gate burst inward, a cart shoved through and tipped, its barrel smashing against the cobbles. The oil spread in slick rivers, catching the dim light of the torches that followed. The first flames bloomed along the far wall. The boy stood. His movements were unhurried, but every shadow in the room seemed to bend toward him. "There are 32 exits from San Rocco," he said quietly. 31 of them are blocked." Conti stepped forward. "And the last?" He didn't answer. Instead, the air thickened, that same invisible web knitting itself tighter until the sound of the flames outside dulled to a muffled heartbeat. Dust lifted from the floor in slow spirals. The cloaked man understood first. "He's not walking out," he said. "He's taking the building with him." The boy blinked once, deliberately, and the stone beneath their feet began to hum. Outside, the men with torches hesitated, staring as cracks split the courtyard wall from the ground up. Through those cracks came not firelight, but a cold, white radiance, spilling outward like water under pressure. Conti didn't ask again. She simply picked up the folio and stepped to the boy's side. "Then let's go," she said. The hum deepened. The wall gave way. The wall did not crumble. It folded. Stone bent like paper, curling inward until the courtyard was no longer visible, replaced by a corridor of smooth, pale surfaces that reflected no light. The air inside was dry, almost brittle, and carried no scent of fire or oil. The boy stepped toward it without hesitation. His bare feet made no sound on the new surface, though each step left behind a faint shimmer, as if the floor itself was remembering him. The cloaked man stood at the threshold, gaze sharp, jaw tight. "That's not part of the asilo," he said. "No," the boy replied. "It's part of me." Conti's pulse quickened. She glanced back. Flames now licked the windows, their smoke curling into the ward. The wood beams overhead groaned as heat began to warp them. The cloaked man's hand went to the dagger at his belt, but he didn't draw it. "Where does it go?" The boy's eyes met his, and for a moment there was no child in them at all, only something patient, ancient, and utterly certain. It goes where they cannot follow. Conti stepped into the corridor after him. The temperature changed instantly. No warmth, no chill, just an absence that made her teeth ache. The sound of the fire outside vanished as though it had never been. She looked back over her shoulder. The cloaked man still stood in the frame, the orange light of the burning ward behind him. "If you cross," the boy said, "you will not come back the same." The cloaked man hesitated just long enough for the first beam to collapse behind him. Then he stepped forward into the silence. The wall closed without a seam. The corridor sloped downward in a way that was hard to measure. Every few steps the perspective shifted so that looking back showed only more descent, never the entry point. The walls pulsed faintly, not with light but with something subtler, like the flex of a muscle under skin. When Conti touched one, it was warm, too warm, and the surface contracted briefly around her fingertips before letting go. "This is anatomy," the cloaked man said under his breath. "We're walking through a body." The boy didn't turn. Through both of them. They reached the first junction, a wide chamber without corners, its floor marked by narrow channels in precise geometric patterns. From somewhere far off, a low resonance hummed, each vibration making the air thicken. Conti noticed movement along the channels, liquid, not blood, not water, but a translucent fluid threaded with tiny sparks, was flowing toward the center of the room. When the boy stepped into the middle, the sparks gathered under his feet, swirling upward in a slow spiral. "This is where I remember what they wanted me to forget," he said. Conti's voice was steady, but her fingers tightened on the folio. "And what is that?" The spiral rose higher, brushing against his hands. For the first time since the ward, he smiled, but it was the kind of smile that belongs to someone recalling a debt unpaid. "That they built me for more than fear." The cloaked man shifted his stance. "If this is memory, then it's not safe to stay. It's not safe to leave," the boy said simply. The channels brightened and the humming deepened until Conti's chest felt heavy. From the far end of the chamber, shapes began to emerge, not walking, not crawling, but assembling from the sparks themselves, taking on features that flickered between human and machine. They were moving toward the three of them. The first of the shapes stepped free from the channel, its form shivering between states. A boy, a man, a lattice of copper and nerve. No part of it stayed still for more than a heartbeat. Its head tilted toward Conti. "You are not in the ledger," it said, voice fractured into overlapping tones, some human, some mechanical, some like the scrape of a quill on vellum. "I'm here for him," she answered. The shape did not move closer, but its edges sharpened. "We know why you are here. The question is whether he does." Conti glanced at the boy. He hadn't moved, but the spiral of sparks around him spun faster, pulling threads of light from the chamber walls. Another shape emerged, taller, its surface a mirror of moving skin that reflected nothing in the room. It faced the cloaked man. "You have been here before," it said. The man's jaw tightened. "Not here." "Close enough." The taller shape extended one limb, longer than it should have been, jointless, and stopped inches from his chest. The air between them shimmered, as though the space itself was being weighed. The boy finally spoke. "They want to know if you'll stay, if you can survive past the second turn." Conti frowned. "And if we can't?" The first shape answered. "You'll leave. Not the way you came. Not whole." The cloaked man's hand twitched toward his dagger, then stilled. "We stay." The taller shape regarded him for a long moment, then withdrew its limb. The sparks around the boy flared, throwing brief, blinding silhouettes across the chamber walls. When the light dimmed, the shapes were gone, dissolved back into the channels, their test complete. The boy began walking again, and the corridor ahead opened without sound. "Past the second turn," he said quietly, "is where they buried the truth." The second turn wasn't a bend in the corridor, it was a change in texture. The smooth living walls gave way to something colder, more rigid, like the inside of a vault. The hum that had filled the air since their entry flattened into a thin, metallic ringing, constant and without echo. Here the floor was marked not with flowing channels, but with inlaid lines of brass, each engraved with numbers and sigils in a script neither Conti nor the cloaked man recognized. The boy walked directly along one of these lines, as if retracing steps he had made long before. They entered a chamber shaped like an octagon, each wall a pane of frosted glass. Behind the glass, indistinct figures moved, their gestures slow and deliberate, as though underwater. Conti's breath caught. "Are those—" The boy interrupted. "Observations. From before." One pane cleared, revealing a scene not of this place, but of a surgical theater lit by gas lamps. A boy lay on a table, small, pale, chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. Above him, masked men in black coats worked with instruments too fine to be meant for ordinary surgery. The cloaked man stepped closer. "That's you." "No," the boy said without turning. "That's the first." The figures behind the glass kept working, their hands moving with the precision of clockmakers. One reached for a tray, lifting a vial that contained not liquid, but a dense weave of filaments that writhed against the glass. Conti felt her stomach knot. "What is that?" "My second," the boy replied. "The nervous system they built for me, the one they couldn't erase." The vial on the other side of the glass trembled as if aware of being seen. The cloaked man glanced between the boy and the scene. "If this is memory, it's being kept here for a reason. Someone wanted it locked away." "They did," the boy said, "but they built the lock out of me." The brass lines beneath their feet brightened, and the chamber's walls began to shift, one by one, the panes turning transparent. And on the other side, the masked figures stopped moving. The figures did not resume their work. Instead, they lifted their heads in unison, the slow-motion quality of the scene shattering into something too sharp, too immediate. Behind the glass, their masked faces turned toward the chamber, toward them. Conti stepped back. "They can see us?" The boy's gaze stayed fixed on the nearest pane. "They can reach us." One of the surgeons set down his instrument and placed a gloved palm against the glass. The frost where he touched it evaporated instantly, leaving a clear handprint. From the other side, the glass began to bulge inward, as if it were no longer solid at all. The cloaked man moved between the boy and the wall, hand going to the dagger at his belt. "If they cross, I can cut them." "No," the boy said sharply. "That won't work here. This isn't them. It's the pattern of them." Before Conti could speak, the pane nearest her flexed. A masked face pressed against it, the glass distorting around its features until the eyes looked impossibly large. She realized with a jolt that the pupils were not human. They were tiny, intricate clockwork spirals, each gear turning in silence. The handprint on the first pane spread, fingers elongating until they reached the floor, feeling blindly for purchase. The boy stepped forward, ignoring the cloaked man's grip on his arm. "They think this place still belongs to them. They're wrong." He placed both hands flat on the brass lines in the floor. At once, the ringing in the air deepened into a single resonant tone. The glass quivered violently, the figures behind it shuddering as if caught in a storm. The masked face twisted away from the pane, its spiral eyes contracting to pinpoints. The grasping hand withdrew, curling into a claw before vanishing entirely. One by one, the panes clouded again, sealing whatever lived inside them back into the frost. Conti exhaled slowly. "What did you just do?" The boy rose, eyes darker than before. Reminded them whose nervous system this really is. The far wall of the octagon cracked, not broken, but splitting along lines that hadn't existed a moment ago. Brass filaments uncoiled from the seams, weaving themselves into an archway. Beyond it lay a hall so vast the ceiling was lost in shadow. The air was denser here, every breath thick with the metallic tang of something alive but unseen. The walls were lined with shelves, not wood or stone, but a dark, porous material that seemed to breathe. On each shelf rested objects wrapped in translucent sheaths, their shapes indistinct, some small as a coin, others large enough to suggest the curve of a human skull. Conti felt her pulse quicken. "What are these?" The boy's eyes flicked from one to another. Responses, reflexes. Every time they tried to erase me, something stayed. It all stayed here. The cloaked man scanned the shelves, and they just sit here waiting. They wait until they're needed. As they moved deeper, the sheaths nearest them began to stir, tightening around their contents as though protecting them. A few pulsed faintly, sending soft glows along the shelves like fire moving through veins. Conti slowed at one that was unwrapped, its contents fully visible. A tiny metal frame, no bigger than a child's palm, held within it a mesh of nerve fibers suspended in amber fluid. It twitched. She stepped back. That's moving. The boy didn't even look. It's remembering. The cloaked man crouched beside another shelf where something large shifted beneath its wrapping, the surface dimpling outward like breath against cloth. If these are your reflexes, they're autonomous. Yes, the boy said, and some of them have been waiting a very long time. At the far end of the hall, a deep vibration rolled through the shelves. The wrapped forms all moved in unison, turning slightly toward the intruders. Conti's voice was low. I think they just noticed us. The vibration deepened until it became more felt than heard, an ache in the bones, a heaviness in the teeth. One by one, the sheaths on the shelves loosened, their translucent skin peeling back to reveal what they held. Some were pieces of anatomy, sections of spine, clusters of nerve endings suspended in metal frames. Others were more abstract. Coils of glass tubing filled with shimmering liquid, shapes like miniature constellations, swarming in slow orbits. They all turned toward the boy. They recognize you, Conti whispered. They should, he replied, but there was no relief in his tone. From the center of the hall, a sound like stretching sinew echoed, and a vast shape began to detach itself from the shadowed ceiling. It descended slowly, an enormous web of nerves and brass filaments knotted together in a pulsating lattice. It was not human, but it bore the unmistakable logic of something that had once been designed. The cloaked man's hand went to his weapon, then froze. What is that? My central archive, the boy said. The part that answers when the rest of me doesn't. The lattice shifted, threads tightening and loosening as if in thought. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it extended a single filament down toward Conti. She stood her ground. The filament hovered inches from her temple, the tip glowing faintly. Then it darted forward, but stopped before making contact, vibrating like a tuning fork. She's not in the schema, the boy murmured. The lattice turned its attention to the cloaked man. Two filaments descended toward him, brushing the air near his throat. The glow brightened. The boy stepped forward sharply. They stay, both of them. The vibration stopped. The filaments withdrew, but the lattice didn't rise back into the shadows. Instead, it began to drift forward, moving deeper into the hall, inviting or commanding them to follow. They followed the drifting lattice deeper into the hall, past shelves where the reflexes no longer stirred. Here, the air grew warmer, tinged with the faint scent of scorched copper. The shelves ended abruptly, giving way to a single pedestal of black stone. Upon it rested something that did not match the rest of the archive. A sphere of crystal, its surface perfectly smooth except for a thin crack spiraling from pole to pole. Inside, faint threads of light pulsed, weaving and unweaving themselves in constant motion. Conti felt her throat tighten. That's it, isn't it? The boy nodded. The root pattern. Before they could build me, they had to build this. The cloaked man circled the pedestal slowly. A map. A map, the boy agreed. Of every possible nerve I could ever grow, both the ones I was born with and the ones they invented. The light inside the sphere shifted, briefly forming the outline of a human head, then dissolving back into formless threads. Conti reached toward it instinctively, but the boy caught her wrist before she made contact. Don't, he said sharply. It doesn't just hold the pattern, it writes it. If you touch it, it will try to use you. The cloaked man's gaze stayed fixed on the crack spiraling across the crystal. Who broke it? I did, the boy said quietly. To keep them from finishing me. The light inside the sphere flickered more violently now, the threads twisting into sharper shapes, almost like script. Conti frowned. It knows we're here. The lattice above them descended again, filaments encircling the pedestal in a slow, deliberate coil. The boy stepped forward. If we take the root pattern, we can end this. And if we don't? The cloaked man asked. The boy's eyes darkened. Then it will finish itself. The boy placed both hands on the pedestal. The moment his fingers touched the stone, the crack in the sphere flared with white light. The threads inside tightened into a single spiraling helix that rotated faster and faster until it became a blur. Conti shielded her eyes. It's burning. No, the boy said through clenched teeth. It's remembering. The pedestal shuddered under his grip. Thin veins of light spread from the sphere down into the black stone, racing outward along the floor in branching lines. Wherever they touched, the shelves and their contents began to stir again, their sheaths peeling open like waking eyes. The cloaked man drew his dagger. You said if we took it, it would end this. It doesn't want to be taken, the boy snapped. The light from the sphere reached the walls, climbing them in jagged patterns. The brass inlays in the floor pulsed in counterpoint, as though the archive itself were trying to contain the sphere's surge. Then the threads inside the crystal abruptly stopped their spiral. They unraveled into a network of fine lines, and each one lashed outward, striking the boy's hands like whips of light. He staggered back, smoke rising from his palms. The crystal's surface no longer reflected the hall. It reflected them, but altered. Conti's reflection showed her with brass lines running under her skin like veins. The cloaked man's reflection had no eyes at all, just empty sockets glowing faintly. And the boy's was missing entirely. The cloaked man gritted his teeth. It's choosing, testing us. No, the boy said, voice low. It's replacing us. The sphere cracked further, a sharp sound like ice breaking. Threads of light began to spill into the air, twisting toward them like roots seeking soil. The roots of light reached their feet, splitting into finer and finer tendrils that curled up their boots, their legs, tasting for skin. Everywhere they touched, a strange numbness spread, as though muscle and nerve were being replaced by something colder, more precise. Conti gasped as a filament brushed her ankle. Her calf muscle seized, then relaxed, but the relaxation wasn't hers. She could feel her leg moving under another's command. The cloaked man slashed at the nearest thread. His blade passed through it cleanly, only for the severed ends to regrow instantly, splitting into two. It can't be cut, the boy said, backing toward the pedestal again. Not here. The archive will keep feeding it. Conti's breathing quickened. Then stop it. Shut it down. The boy's eyes flicked to the sphere. If I shut it down, I shut myself down. The lattice above them descended rapidly now, filaments lashing around the sphere like restraints, as if the archive itself feared what the root pattern was doing. Sparks leapt from crystal to brass, the air thick with the ozone scent of overloading machinery. The cloaked man's voice was low, urgent. Then we destroy it. All of it. You don't understand, the boy said. If we break the pattern, the rest of the archive will go feral. Everything in it will hunt for something to anchor to. And we're the only living things in here. A sharp crack split the air. The sphere's spiral fracture widened, light spilling through it in blinding arcs. The roots surged upward, wrapping around Conti's torso and the cloaked man's arm. Their skin blistered where the threads touched, and beneath the blistering came a faint, mechanical ticking. Conti locked eyes with the boy. Choose. His hands hovered over the sphere, trembling, not from fear, but from the strain of keeping them there. Either I become it, he whispered, or we all feed it. The boy's palms pressed flat against the sphere. Immediately, the light inside writhed, no longer graceful threads, but jagged bolts, striking in every direction. The roots binding Conti and the cloaked man tightened, pulling them toward the pedestal as though the pattern meant to draw them in. I'm not yours, the boy said, voice low but steady. You were mine first. The crystal pulsed violently. A single filament of light extended from within, piercing the crack and slipping into the boy's wrist. His body jerked. The veins in his arm lit up like molten brass, the glow racing toward his shoulder, his neck. Conti thrashed against the roots. It's taking him. No, the cloaked man said, eyes narrowing. He's taking it. The sphere's glow dimmed for an instant. as if something inside it had been drawn away. Then it flared back brighter than before, pushing harder, its threads trying to flood every nerve in the boy's body at once. Blood ran from his nose, sizzling as it hit the pedestal. "I can hold it," he gritted, "but not here. You have to—" The rest of his words vanished in a sudden shift of the hall itself. The shelves began folding inward, their contents slithering off in long, eel-like shapes, heading for the pedestal. The lattice above dropped lower, wrapping around the boy like a cage, shielding him from the converging swarm. The sphere's voice came, not spoken but heard directly in their skulls. "You are a corrupt host. Release control." The boy's head snapped up, eyes glowing with the same light as the sphere. "No." The threads binding Conti and the cloaked man snapped all at once. They stumbled free, but the roots didn't retreat. They redirected, straight toward the boy. The roots didn't strike the boy. They plunged into the floor. Instantly, the black stone underfoot began to ripple, as if softening into liquid. Brass inlays warped, twisting into new circuits that spiderwebbed outward in every direction. The shelves groaned. Their neat rows shattered as the wood bent and split, reshaping into crude, rib-like arches. The anatomical fragments within began to twitch, their suspended forms stretching into shapes they had never been, neither human nor machine, but a fusion of the two. Conti staggered backward, nearly slipping as the floor swelled upward under her boots. "It's remaking the archive." "Not remaking," the cloaked man said grimly. "Realigning. It's changing the whole room to match itself." The boy kept his hands on the sphere, his jaw locked in defiance. The glow from his veins was brighter now, almost blinding. "If it rewrites the hall," he said, "the archive stops being a container. It becomes an extension of the pattern." The lattice overhead convulsed, filaments snapping free and reattaching in frantic loops. Its pulses grew erratic, as if it was trying to reinforce the old structure faster than the pattern could erase it. But the sphere's influence was faster. Arches of living brass rose from the floor, knitting themselves overhead. Nerve-like cords descended from them, brushing the tops of their heads. Wherever the cords touched stone or metal, they left trails of glowing circuitry that crawled outward like lichen. The cloaked man yanked Conti toward the boy. "If you can't stop it, then we leave, now." The boy's teeth clenched. "If I let go, it'll finish in seconds." A pulse ran through the floor, and every nerve cord froze mid-movement. For a heartbeat, the entire hall held still. Then, all at once, the cords turned toward them. The cords dropped. Not like falling rope, like striking vipers, they snapped toward their heads, shoulders, and throats, moving faster than thought. The first struck Conti's shoulder, and she felt a cold bloom beneath her skin, followed by the metallic taste of copper flooding her mouth. The cloaked man intercepted another, slicing through it mid-strike. The severed end writhed in his hand, then lunged for his wrist like a severed eel. He hurled it aside, but more were coming down from every angle. The shelves finished their collapse, transforming into scaffolds of brass and bone. From their joints sprouted additional cords, all converging on the pedestal in the center of the hall, on the boy. He stood motionless, hands fused to the sphere, his skin now glowing from within. "I can't hold it and fight them," he said. "You'll have to clear me a path." "Path to where?" Conti demanded. "The root node," he said. "It's beneath us." A cord lashed toward his neck. The cloaked man intercepted, the impact driving him to one knee. The cord recoiled, only to strike again from the side. Conti pulled a hooked blade from her belt, short, curved, perfect for severing. She caught one cord mid-swing, the steel biting deep. The cord screeched, the sound not in the air but in her skull, a burst of pure static. The boy's voice cut through it. "If they reach me, they'll finish the link. You cannot let them touch me." The floor buckled beneath the pedestal, splitting to reveal a narrow shaft spiraling downward into blackness. From that dark came the sound of a slow, wet heartbeat. The cloaked man glanced down. "That the node?" "Yes," the boy said. "And it's awake." The heartbeat from below was impossibly deep. Each pulse seemed to push the air in their lungs, forcing them to breathe in sync with it. The cloaked man grabbed the boy's arm. "We're moving." The boy's hands tore free from the sphere with a sound like wet cloth ripping. Threads of light still clung to his palms, stretching thin before snapping back into the crystal. The moment he stepped away, the chords above screamed in unison and dove for him. Conti leapt to intercept, blades flashing, cutting three in rapid succession. Each severed end recoiled violently, striking the walls and sending sparks into the dim air. But for every one she cut, two more emerged from the brass scaffolds. They half-dragged, half-carried the boy toward the shaft. The pedestal cracked behind them, a wave of light surging out and crawling across the floor after their heels. The shaft was lined with black stone that pulsed faintly, veins of light moving downward in a spiral. As they began their descent, the walls seemed to flex, narrowing just enough to brush their shoulders. Halfway down, the cords followed. They slithered over the lip above, dropping like ropes in pursuit. The brass tips of some had split into fine hooks, catching on the walls to gain speed. Conti's voice was tight. "We won't outrun them." The boy, panting, raised one trembling hand toward the walls. The light in the veins brightened under his touch, and for a brief moment the stone hardened, sealing behind them. It lasted 3 seconds before a single hook punched through the wall, followed by another. The cloaked man didn't slow. "Then we make sure we reach it before they do." The heartbeat grew louder with each step, until it wasn't just sound, but vibration in the stone under their feet. The walls here were damp, warm. Something living was very close. Then the spiral opened into a vast chamber, and at its center, suspended in a cradle of brass roots, was the true sphere, 3 times the size of the one above, its surface almost breathing. The true sphere was nothing like the archive's crystal above. It was darker, its surface a deep, oily black that caught the faint light and bent it inward, as though it swallowed illumination rather than reflected it. Yet beneath that blackness, shapes moved. Not threads this time, but silhouettes. Too quick, too indistinct to name. Each motion seemed timed with the chamber's slow, wet heartbeat. The boy froze at the threshold. "It knows." The cloaked man's voice was low. "Knows what?" "That I'm not complete," the boy whispered. The brass roots that held the sphere shifted. They creaked like old wood, bending outward in a deliberate, almost ceremonial gesture, revealing more of the sphere's surface. A single crack ran across it, wide enough to see inside. From within came not light, but a faint reflection of them. Conti stepped closer, peering in. Her stomach dropped. The reflections weren't moving in sync. Her image blinked a half-second too late. The cloaked man's mouth was moving, though he said nothing. The boy's reflection was smiling. The boy took a step back, but the sphere's heartbeat quickened, thudding faster, louder, until the walls vibrated. From the crack, a thin mist rolled out, curling in the air before drifting toward them. The mist moved with intent. It reached the boy first, brushing his cheek. His eyes flickered, pupils dilating until no iris remained. He whispered something none of them could hear, but the reflection of him mouthed the words perfectly. The cloaked man put a hand on his shoulder. "What did it say?" The boy's voice was distant. "It's been waiting. For me. For all of us." The brass roots twisted again, lowering the sphere until it hung barely a meter above the floor. The crack widened, and from within came the sound of dozens of ticking mechanisms, like 100 nervous systems trying to keep the same rhythm. The sphere's surface bulged, then split, opening like a pupil. It was inviting them in. The opening in the sphere was not a doorway. It was a wound. From its edges dripped strands of glistening material, not quite liquid, not quite thread, each one twitching faintly as though sensing the air. The mist pouring from within grew denser, swirling low to the floor, curling around their boots in slow, deliberate spirals. Conti's fingers tightened around her blade. "We break it now." The boy didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the darkness inside the sphere. "If we do, the whole pattern will collapse. Not just here, everywhere it's embedded. In me." The cloaked man stepped between them. "And if you go in?" The boy's voice was steady now, almost calm. "Then I finish what it started. I'll have both systems, the one I was born with and the one it built. No one will be able to erase it. Or me." Conti's tone was sharp. "Or it takes you completely." The heartbeat filled the chamber, faster now, almost impatient. The brass roots trembled, the entire structure leaning subtly toward them, as if the node itself were bending closer to listen. The mist coiled higher, brushing their knees, their waists. It smelled faintly of ozone and something older, like stone after centuries in the dark. The cloaked man's eyes didn't leave the boy. "You understand there's no coming back from either choice." "I understood that the day they put two systems in me," the boy said. The sphere's wound widened another inch, revealing not darkness but a pulsing network of golden veins inside, each one throbbing in time with the chamber's heartbeat. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the boy took a single step toward the opening. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the sound of the heartbeat vanished. Silence rushed in, not empty but thick, pressing against his ears like deep water. The air inside the sphere was warmer, denser, every breath slow to enter his lungs. The golden veins he'd seen from outside were now immense, arching structures that pulsed with steady light, casting moving patterns across the interior. They weren't fixed to the walls. They floated, suspended in a fluid medium that rippled with his movements. The floor was no longer solid stone, but a mesh of fine, translucent threads. Beneath them, shapes moved, too indistinct to name, but their motion was purposeful, like organisms gliding just out of sight. Something touched his wrist. He looked down. A thread had risen from the mesh, curling around his arm. It wasn't pulling, it was reading him. Tiny pulses ran along its length, and with each one his skin tingled, as though it were memorizing every nerve. A voice, not heard but felt, entered his mind. It was low, resonant, impossible to mistake for human. Second system detected, incomplete. He swallowed. "You built it." "Correction. We grew it. You are carrier and container." The thread around his arm tightened, and with it came a flood of sensation, memories not his own, patterns of movement, reactions, reflexes. His body twitched involuntarily, matching rhythms he didn't recognize but somehow understood. Outside, Conti and the cloaked man saw the boy's silhouette blur, edges flickering like an image caught between two frames. His glow deepened to a molten gold, and fine threads began creeping across his skin, branching like veins toward his neck. Inside, the voice returned. "Complete the link, or the cycle ends." The golden veins overhead pulsed faster. One by one they began bending toward him. The golden veins closed in, their arcs forming a cage around him. Each one hummed faintly. A note too low for human ears, felt more in the teeth and bones than in the air. Threads rose from the mesh beneath his feet, dozens of them, coiling around his legs, torso, neck. They did not pierce, yet, but each carried a pulse, a rhythm that sought to overwrite his own. "Synchronize." The command slammed into his mind with such force his knees buckled. His second nervous system, the lattice of alien impulses grown inside him, answered instantly, reaching toward the incoming rhythm like a hand grasping another. But his human system flinched. It recoiled, sending sharp bursts of resistance down every nerve. His vision doubled, then tripled. He could feel his heartbeat split into two distinct tempos, one familiar, one perfectly mechanical. Outside the sphere, Conti shouted something he couldn't hear. The cloaked man had his hand on the hilt of a blade, but the mist curling around them seemed to whisper, "Interrupt, and the cycle will shatter." Inside, the cage of veins pressed closer, their light blinding. His second system surged forward, hungry to link. His human system locked every muscle in defiance. The clash sent white-hot pain through his skull. "Rejection is non-optimal. I am not yours to finish. You are already ours." The first vein touched his chest, not cold, searing. It pushed through skin without breaking it, sliding along bone and muscle as if rewriting the space inside him. The second followed, then a third. Each contact deepened the glow beneath his skin until his outline was almost too bright to see. The two rhythms in him began to align, The chamber within the sphere dimmed, as though the node itself was conserving all light for him. Only the golden veins and the boy's body still glowed, two suns fighting for the same sky. The human rhythm was uneven, fragile, shaped by years of imperfection and pain. It carried the scent of wood smoke, the memory of a mother's voice, the tremor in his hands after the first time he ran from the men in white coats. The second rhythm was flawless. Every pulse hit with the precision of a pendulum in a vacuum, unyielding, unstoppable. It promised no fear, no hesitation, no sleep, only function. The two pounded against each other in his chest until the sound filled his skull. His breath caught, his muscles twitched in erratic spasms. For a moment, he wondered if this was what dying felt like, not an end, but being split in half until there was no he left to name. Choose. The word was not a request. The golden veins pressed deeper, threading into him. Each insertion pushed the mechanical rhythm forward, erasing a memory, dulling a sensation. He felt the warmth of his childhood blanket vanish, replaced by a perfect recall of the weight of surgical restraints. His human system fought back, flooding him with disordered images, faces in shadow, the smell of Florence rain, a burst of laughter at midnight. It was messy. It was alive. The pressure built until his vision narrowed to a tunnel of light. He understood that whichever rhythm won in the next breath would devour the other completely. His fists clenched, his jaw locked, and then he stopped resisting. Light exploded behind his closed eyes, a storm of colors too sharp, too vivid, then sudden darkness like falling through endless void. When he opened his eyes again, the chamber was silent. The golden veins had faded to a dull bronze, lifeless and brittle. His body no longer trembled with dual pulses but pulsed steadily, slow, controlled, precise. A calm settled over him, but it was not peace. It was something sharper, like a blade honed to perfect edge, ready to cut through illusions and lies. He reached out and the threads beneath his feet responded, bending without resistance. The voice that had once spoken in his mind was gone, replaced by something quieter, yet infinitely more commanding. You are the link, the bridge between systems. His reflection flickered in the surface of the sphere, a single self, but layered, complex, an echo folded inside another echo. Outside, Conti and the cloaked man watched silently, the weight of what had happened pressing down on them like a stone. The boy stepped forward from the sphere's hollow, his eyes sharper, his presence heavier, no longer just human, but something else, something no institution could erase. He stood at the threshold between worlds, no longer confined to the flesh and bone identity forged by nature, nor enslaved by the cold machinery of the second system. He had become both, and neither, a singularity forged in shadow. The chamber's pulse now echoed his own, steady and unyielding. The golden veins flickered once, then dimmed, their purpose fulfilled. He was the new node, the living bridge across realities hidden beneath the surface of science and power. Outside the sphere, unseen eyes watched. Forces, ancient and vast, lurking behind institutions and silent halls, recognized the shift. Whispers slid through corridors of power, a name never spoken aloud. The boy with two nervous systems, the anomaly they sought to erase but never could. He was no longer just a subject of study. He had transcended the role assigned by those who wielded knowledge like a weapon. Now, he was the weapon. His mind expanded, memories weaving seamlessly with foreign patterns and forbidden truths. The systems within him no longer clashed but coalesced, unlocking dormant potential and revealing secrets long buried in the fabric of existence. But with power came isolation. He felt the cold gaze of inevitability, the cost of bearing forbidden knowledge, the burden of standing between what is known and what must remain hidden. Still, he knew this was only the beginning. The world above remained blind, shackled by lies and manipulation. He was destined to be the spark in the dark, the pulse that awakened those willing to see beyond. Now listen closely, because what you've just witnessed is not just a story. It is a map of what lies beneath your skin, beneath the world you think you know. There are systems within you too. Forces pulling, pushing, shaping your every thought, every breath, every choice. Most never see them, Most never question the architecture built around their minds, their bodies, their lives. But you're here. You heard the secret erased by time and power. So now, I ask you, type these words below twice to claim what you've learned. I am the link. I am the bridge. I am the link. I am the bridge. Say it, not just with your fingers, but with the part of you that refuses to be controlled. Because the moment you do, you're no longer just a viewer, you're awakened. And once you see, there's no turning back. You are connected, you are powerful, you are the future that they tried to erase. Remember that.